What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Week 6 running back trade targets. As I said yesterday, I'll be splitting the trade video into 2 this week. I went over buy low and sell high candidates at the wide receiver position Wednesday. So today, I'll be talking about running backs. Now, the logic for running backs is a little bit different than wide receivers. We're not going to look at all at air yards unless someone's just getting a ton of them. I'll say right now, I don't even use it in today's video. That's really something you look at for wide receivers. It's pretty rare that a running back is just getting a boatload of air yards, but they're not producing. What we're mainly focused on is volume potential and touchdown luck. So identifying players who are getting more or less volume than people think, or who might be getting lucky or unlucky with touchdowns. We'll start off with some players to buy low on, and the first player is Alvin Kamara. Now, Alvin Kamara is a top 3 fantasy running back regardless of the scoring format. And that's exactly what you should be willing to give up whenever you're trading for him. But he's currently the running back 6 in PPR, 7 in half PPR, and the only reason is the touchdowns. But that's never been something for Alvin Kamara. You know, over the first 2 seasons of his career, he's had 13 and 18 touchdowns. The dude gets the ball near the goal line, and yet he only has 2 through 5 weeks, with both of them coming in week 3. So he hasn't scored a touchdown in 4 out of the 5 weeks this season. In fact, just 12.4% of his fantasy points this season have come from touchdowns. That's the 7th lowest percentage of any running back with at least 50 carries, and it's not like the Saints haven't been scoring. They're still above average in points per game, and Drew Brees is coming back soon. It's almost impossible to trade for these higher-end running backs in fantasy, so don't expect his owner to just give him away for not very much. He's still dominating this year. But if you're in a league where the Kamara owner is struggling, then figure out what they need and offer a trade that they might actually consider. I'll give you an example. Last week, the Saquon Barkley owner in my league was 0-4, and they needed a win that week. You know, you drop to 0-5, your chances of making the playoffs really take a pretty big hit. Now, my team wasn't dominating or anything, but it could afford one loss, especially because I have Tyreek Hill coming back soon. I noticed that he needed help at wide receiver, and since I have Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Tyreek Hill, Golladay, I could afford to lose Cooper and fill a need that he had. So I offered him Amari Cooper for Saquon Barkley. Now, I had to add in Ronald Jones to finalize the deal, but he accepted it because he knew he needed to win now, and I was filling a need on his team. So you don't need to only look for mid-range players for cheap, because trades with elite running backs can get done. Again, it's really difficult to find an owner that's willing to do them, but they can get done if you offer trades that are fair and are actually going to help out both sides, especially if the Kamara owner is struggling. The next player is Le'Veon Bell. Again, I included him last week, but I warned that the Eagles are the most difficult running back matchup. I like the idea of starting trade talks a week before you really expect the trade to get done, so that owner is thinking about the deal, then watches their player kind of perform badly. Well, they're more likely to go to you to fill out that trade. Well, Bell averaged just under 2.9 yards per carry and totaled 88 scoreless yards. Just 8.5% of his fantasy points this season have come off of touchdowns, which ranks as the 4th lowest among running backs with at least 50 carries. Well, Darnold comes back this week, so his owner might not be willing to part ways with him, but I definitely give it a chance. He's the running back 19 in half PPR scoring, but he still has the 3rd most receptions among running backs, even through just 4 games. Remember, he's already had his bye, and that's an extra bump. He's on pace for 108 receptions this season, but the Jets currently rank 31st in points per game at 9.8 points per game. I can promise you that's going way up, and I'd be very surprised if he doesn't finish among the top 7 or 8 running backs this season, regardless of format. So he's definitely one of the guys I would heavily target this week, because this might be the last week you can get him. The next player is probably going to surprise some of you because he's actually gone off the last 2 weeks, and you should have already traded for him like I told you before he went off, But Leonard Fournette has still been one of the unluckiest running backs this season. So even though he went off, he should still have done much better to start the season. Just 6.7% of his fantasy points have come from touchdowns, and yet he's currently the running back 10 because he's playing virtually every snap and he's extremely involved in the receiving game. He also has 6 green zone touches, with James O'Shaughnessy being the only other player on that team with more than 1, and he only has 2. Before week 4, I said I think Leonard Fournette is going to have double-digit touchdowns this season, and I still believe that's going to happen. Right now, he's on pace for over 1,600 rushing yards and over 60 receptions, and if he adds double-digit touchdowns to that as well, then that puts him on pace to finish as a top 5 running back. But I can assure you that even after his 2 big games, you can still get him for less than top 5 running back value. And if someone won't let him go for less than that, well then just wait a week or 2, wait for a game where he doesn't go off, because then his price is going to go down and he'll still be an elite running back that's not going to cost you anywhere near what Bell and Kamara will. If you don't want to give up a whole lot, you're like, Nick, I'm not looking for running back 1. I'm looking for someone to help me with my bench or help me in these bye weeks. Then how about Royce Freeman? Yes, I've mentioned him for a few weeks now, but he's one of the 2 players who have been getting unbelievably unlucky with touchdowns. It's kind of amazing that he's still the running back 31, even with 0 touchdowns. And it's amazing he hasn't scored yet. He has 5 green zone touches and 71 touches overall. Given his volume and given his opportunity near the goal line, he should have 2 or 3 touchdowns at this point in the season. And if he did, he'd be more in that running back 18 to 21 range, not 31. I know I've said he's been unlucky for the past few weeks now, but he has the same number of green zone touches as David Johnson. So the touchdowns are coming, and he makes for a great cheap running back target if you need one. I also want to mention Miles Sanders. I'll do it briefly so no one rips my head off, but Sanders has 17 targets to Howard's 9, and he has 54 carries to Howard's 53. Then they played the exact same number of snaps last week, and Howard has just 1 more touch inside the 10-yard line than Sanders. Yet somehow, Howard leads the league in percent of fantasy points coming off touchdowns, and Sanders hasn't scored yet. That's the only difference. You know, the argument that they don't use Sanders near the goal line is just false. Howard has 8 touches inside the 10, and Sanders has 7. If you only looked at volume, then there's no way you would guess that Miles Sanders is a running back 38 and Howard's a running back 17. But that's how random touchdowns are, especially in an extremely small 5-game sample. Sanders will cost you next to nothing, so I don't know why you wouldn't look to get him as depth on your bench. That's it for buy low this week. Let's look at some running backs that we can sell high on if we have them, and we'll start off with Todd Gurley. Gurley opened the season getting 16 touches per week and 9.7 fantasy points per game over the first 3 weeks. But then, over the last 2 games, he's dropped to 15 touches a game, but the fantasy points have jumped to 20 per game, thanks to his 4 touchdowns through 2 weeks. But Gurley is exactly what we thought he would be, a highly touchdown-dependent running back getting at most 17 to 18 touches a week, but averaging closer to 15 or 16. After the 4 touchdowns through the last 2 weeks, people are going to think that he's back, but he's not. He had 23 half PPR points in week 4 on 5 carries. And he just doesn't look like the old Todd Gurley, because you could argue that they're keeping him fresh and, giving him these limited touches means he's going to be really efficient with them. But he hasn't been. His yards per carry are down to 4.2 after 4.7 and 4.9 over the last 2 seasons, and his yards per target are down to just 3.1 after 9.1 and 7.2 over the last 2 years. So yeah, he can sustain running back 1 numbers, but he's only the running back 14 right now, despite being on pace for 16 touchdowns. So I'd look to move him while the touchdowns are piling up, because it's going to be a lot tougher to do so after he has a game with 0 touchdowns. Another player I'd look to trade is Sony Michel, but I'd set him at a high price if you're watching this before the Thursday night game. The Pats are likely to win by at least 2 scores, maybe 3 scores, given how many players could be out on the Giants. So this sets up like a really nice Sony Michel game to have another 100 and a touchdown. But he's another player like Gurley that's extremely touchdown dependent. 36% of his fantasy points have come off of touchdowns, which is the 7th most among running backs with at least 50 carries. Even with the Patriots blowing out nearly every single opponent, he's only the running back 25 in these amazing game scripts. When they start playing actual opponents, he's not going to be used as much. They're going to lean more on James White and Rex Burkhead, at least once Burkhead is fully healthy. So I just hope if you own him that he scores a touchdown, rushes for a bunch of yards in the Thursday night game, and then I'd look to try and get running back 2 value for him, because he's going to face a string of defenses and teams in the middle section of the year that are more difficult matchups for him, and he's just far more unlikely to produce. The top sell high, though, is Jordan Howard. Like I said, this man has been the luckiest player in the league when it comes to touchdowns, especially over the last 3 weeks. 45.8% of his total fantasy points on the season have come off of touchdowns, which is the most by a good chunk. But that number jumps to 54.5% over the last 3 weeks. He's a non-factor in the receiving game, despite what you think you saw in the primetime game in week 4. So even if you aren't a Miles Sanders fan, you have to realize that he's just not a factor unless he scores, and even then, he's barely relevant unless he scores twice. So I'd absolutely be looking to trade him after these last 3 weeks have happened, because Miles Sanders is gonna score at some point, and this was likely the best 3-game stretch Howard is gonna have this season. So those are the top trade targets at the running back position in week 6. The trade model on the website does highlight running backs to trade for, although I am working on a separate model that will indicate only running backs to trade for, since the current one only looks at receiving volume. A running back does make the top of the list this week, and the only other time that's happened was in week 3 before Lindsay exploded. So I guess we'll see what happens this time. But again, I'm working on a running back trade model that'll look at carries and opportunity on the ground. Tomorrow, I'll be going over the running back position again, but I'll be talking about players who you should be starting and sitting this week. So be on the lookout for that one. But that's the end of this video. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And if you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.